They were never meant to be found, hidden behind velvet curtains, buried beneath hotel floors, locked away in rooms where the rich paid to disappear. From the blood-soaked streets of Havana to the silent backrooms of Monte Carlo, the world's most dangerous men built secret empires where fortunes were stolen, lives were gambled away, and the only rule was the house always wins. But these casinos didn't have neon signs, no cameras, no police, only whispers, only shadows. Once you walked in, there was no way out. The Flamingo, Las Vegas, USA. The Flamingo Hotel and Casino was the brainchild of infamous gangster Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, a charismatic but ruthless member of the Jewish mafia. In the 1940s, Las Vegas was still a barren desert town with little more than a few scattered casinos and motels, but Siegel saw its untapped potential. He envisioned a luxury resort that would bring the glamour of Hollywood to the Nevada desert, and in doing so, he would create a gambling empire that the mafia could use to launder money, skim profits, and solidify their presence in the burgeoning casino industry. Funded primarily by organized crime syndicates, including Meyer Lansky and the Genovese crime family, the Flamingo was meant to be the most extravagant casino of its time. Siegel personally oversaw every detail of construction, often making last-minute, costly changes that infuriated his mob backers. What was supposed to be a $1 million project ballooned to over $6 million, and as delays mounted, so did the impatience of those who had invested in the venture. Despite its financial turmoil, the Flamingo finally opened on December 26, 1946. But it was a disaster. Rain poured down on opening night, celebrities failed to show up, and high rollers didn't spend nearly enough to make the casino profitable. The losses were staggering, and Siegel's reputation within the mafia began to crumble. Determined to turn things around, Siegel reopened the Flamingo in March 1947, and this time, it was a massive success. The casino's luxurious setting, complete with pink flamingo decor, drew Hollywood's elite, and the high-stakes games started generating the kind of money that the mafia had dreamed of. But Siegel's success was short-lived. His financial mismanagement, coupled with suspicions that he had been skimming from the mafia's cut, sealed his fate. On June 20th, 1947, Siegel was assassinated in Beverly Hills, a brutal reminder that no one, no matter how ambitious or connected, was untouchable in the underworld. Despite his death, the Flamingo continued to thrive and became one of Las Vegas's most iconic casinos, proving that Siegel's vision had been right all along, even if he didn't live to see its full success. The Copacabana, New York, USA. The Copacabana was one of the most glamorous and exclusive nightclubs in New York City, a place where celebrities, politicians, and the elite came to drink, dance, and be seen. But behind its glitzy exterior, it also operated as an underground casino controlled by the Lucky's crime family. During the 1940s and 1950s, the club was more than just a hotspot for live music. It was a key hub for illegal gambling, loan sharking, and mafia-run rackets that funneled millions of dollars into organized crime. Founded in 1940, the Copacabana quickly became a favorite among Hollywood stars and mob bosses alike. Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, and Sammy Davis Jr. performed there regularly, giving the venue a sense of legitimacy and high-class allure. However, beneath the dance floors and velvet-covered walls, secret high-stakes poker games and blackjack tables operated out of hidden backrooms, catering exclusively to the wealthy and well-connected. These games were invitation only, and the house always took a significant cut, ensuring that the Lucchese family made massive profits without drawing too much attention from law enforcement. The Copacabana's underground casino was run with military precision. Armed guards ensured that only approved guests were allowed into the gambling areas, and the mafia provided loans to high rollers who ran out of cash, charging exorbitant interest rates that kept them trapped in a cycle of debt. If someone couldn't pay, they weren't just politely asked to leave. They faced brutal consequences, ranging from intimidation to severe beatings or worse. The club's bouncers were often mob enforcers, ensuring that no one caused trouble or spoke about what went on behind closed doors. Despite law enforcement's growing awareness of organized crime's influence in New York's nightlife, the Copacabana continued operating with near impunity for years. Police raids were rare, and when they did happen, the club always had enough political connections and corrupt officials on payroll to ensure that charges were dropped or minimized. In many cases, city officials and high-ranking politicians were themselves patrons of the club, making it all the more difficult to crack down on its illicit activities. Eventually, as federal pressure on organized crime escalated in the late 1950s and early 1960s, the Copacabana began to decline. Increased scrutiny from the FBI, combined with internal power struggles within the Luckys family, led to the gradual winding down of its underground gambling operations. The club itself continued to operate as a legitimate entertainment venue for years, but it was never the same. By the time it finally closed its doors in the early 2000s, the era of mafia-run underground casinos and glamorous nightclubs had long passed. Despite its eventual demise, the Copacabana remains one of the most infamous symbols of the golden age of organized crime in New York. It was a place where money flowed freely, where mobsters rubbed shoulders with Hollywood's elite, and where the mafia's grip on the city was at its strongest. The millions made in its hidden gambling dens helped fuel the expansion of organized crime, funding everything from narcotics trafficking to political bribery. It was a reminder that, for a time, the mafia didn't just control the streets, they controlled the city's nightlife, its culture, and its wealth. The Havana Hilton, Cuba. Before Fidel Castro's revolution transformed Cuba, Havana was a paradise for gamblers, celebrities, and criminals alike. At the heart of this underworld empire was the Havana Hilton, a massive luxury hotel and casino that served as a central hub for mafia operations in the 1950s. The project was largely orchestrated by Meyer Lansky, the financial mastermind of the American mafia, who saw Havana as an untapped gold mine where organized crime could operate without the constraints of U.S. law enforcement. During the mid-20th century, Cuba was under the rule of Fulgencio Batista, a dictator who had no qualms about working with the mafia in exchange for bribes and political support. Batista allowed Lansky and other mob bosses to establish high-end casinos, ensuring that their businesses could thrive without government interference. Among these casinos, the Havana Hilton was the crown jewel, a massive resort where the rich and powerful could gamble away fortunes while enjoying the Cuban nightlife. The hotel was built with legitimate funding, but behind the scenes, it was a mafia-controlled operation designed to funnel millions of dollars into organized crime syndicates. High rollers from the United States, Europe, and Latin America flocked to the casino's lavish gaming floors, where rigged games, manipulated odds, and high-stakes tables ensured that the house always won. Secret backrooms hosted illegal activities, including drug deals, money laundering, and prostitution rings that catered to the wealthiest clientele. Lansky, a master strategist, ran the Havana Hilton like a well-oiled machine. He implemented strict security measures to prevent skimming and ensured that every dollar passing through the casino was accounted for. Unlike many mobsters of his time, Lansky preferred to operate behind the scenes, keeping a low profile while pulling the strings of the entire operation. His ability to forge strong relationships with Batista's government allowed the casino to operate with complete impunity, and the profits were astronomical. At its peak, the Havana Hilton was generating millions of dollars per month, much of which was smuggled back to the United States or reinvested into other mafia-controlled businesses. However, the good times didn't last. By the late 1950s, Fidel Castro's revolutionary movement was gaining momentum, and the growing instability in Cuba threatened the mafia's stranglehold on Havana's casino industry. In 1959, when Castro's forces successfully overthrew Batista's regime, the mafia's empire in Havana collapsed almost overnight. Castro viewed the casinos as symbols of corruption and exploitation, and he immediately ordered their closure, seizing the properties and expelling American mobsters from the country. The Havana Hilton, once a beacon of criminal enterprise, was converted into a government-run hotel, stripping the mafia of one of its most lucrative assets. For Lansky and his associates, the loss of Havana was devastating. The city had been their playground, a place where they could operate without the constant fear of FBI surveillance or legal repercussions. The fall of the Havana Hilton marked the end of an era, forcing the mafia to refocus its efforts elsewhere, particularly in Las Vegas and other parts of the United States. Though the Havana Hilton no longer operates as a casino, its history remains a testament to the mafia's ability to infiltrate legitimate industries and turn them into criminal empires. For a brief period, Havana was the mob's personal paradise, a place where fortunes were won and lost, and where the line between legal business and organized crime was all but non-existent. The Stardust, Las Vegas, USA. The Stardust was one of the most infamous mob-controlled casinos in Las Vegas, a place where organized crime funneled millions of dollars while operating under the guise of legitimate business. Built in 1958, the Stardust was secretly controlled by the Chicago Outfit, one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the United States. The casino quickly became a hub for high-stakes gambling, entertainment, and large-scale money laundering, making it one of the most profitable mob enterprises of its time. Unlike some other mafia-controlled casinos, which relied on flashy gangsters and violent intimidation, the Stardust operated with quiet efficiency. The mob installed Frank "Lefty" Rosenthal, a brilliant but ruthless gambling expert, to run the casino's day-to-day operations. Under Rosenthal's management, the Stardust became a goldmine, offering everything from sports betting to rigged slot machines that guaranteed a steady flow of cash into mafia-controlled bank accounts. One of the most sophisticated criminal schemes at the Stardust was skimming, the practice of siphoning off casino profits before they were officially recorded. The Chicago Outfit, along with the Kansas City, Milwaukee, and Cleveland crime families, used the Stardust as a central hub for this operation. Money was taken directly from the cash cages, transported out of the casino in suitcases, and then redistributed among the various mafia factions involved. Because these profits were never recorded, they were tax-free, allowing the mob to amass untold millions without drawing the attention of federal authorities. Security at the Stardust was tight, but it wasn't there to protect customers. It was there to protect the mafia's interests. Surveillance cameras, armed guards, and corrupt casino executives ensured that no one interfered with the mob's cash flow. Employees who asked too many questions often found themselves out of a job, or worse. Rosenthal, despite being the mastermind behind the casino's success, faced his own share of problems. He was never officially granted a gaming license due to his known associations with organized crime, which forced him to operate from behind the scenes. Meanwhile, his volatile relationship with mob enforcer Anthony "Tony the Ant" Spilotro created internal tensions that threatened the entire operation. Spilotro, a violent and unpredictable hitman, was tasked with handling the casino's muscle, but his reckless behavior and constant law enforcement scrutiny put the Stardust under unwanted attention. By the late 1970s, the federal government had begun cracking down on mafia involvement in Las Vegas. The FBI launched extensive investigations into casino skimming operations, and the Stardust was at the center of it all. In 1983, authorities finally had enough evidence to seize control of the casino, effectively ending the mob's reign over the property. The Chicago Outfit and its partners suffered heavy financial losses, and many key figures, including Rosenthal and Spilotro, faced legal troubles or violent retribution. The downfall of the Stardust marked the beginning of the end for mafia influence in Las Vegas. As federal regulations tightened and corporate entities took over casino operations, the days of mob-controlled gambling empires became a thing of the past. Though the Stardust was eventually demolished in 2007, its legacy as a mafia stronghold lives on. The casino story was the inspiration for the movie Casino, 1995, starring Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci, which depicted the rise and fall of organized crime in Las Vegas. For decades, the Stardust was more than just a casino. It was a symbol of how deeply the mafia had embedded itself into the very fabric of Las Vegas. It was a place where fortunes were made and lives were ruined, all under the watchful eyes of some of the most dangerous men in America. Palermo gambling houses, Sicily, Italy. In the shadowy alleys of Palermo, where the Sicilian mafia, known as Cosa Nostra, ruled with an iron fist, underground gambling houses became one of the most secretive and profitable operations in the entire criminal empire. Unlike the glitzy casinos of Las Vegas or Havana, these hidden dens operated in total silence. No flashing lights, no billboards, only whispers carried through the criminal underworld. Throughout the 20th century, the Cosa Nostra's power in Sicily was absolute, and illegal gambling was one of their most lucrative revenue streams. The gambling houses of Palermo were often disguised as legitimate businesses, cafes, private clubs, or even residential apartments. Behind locked doors, however, they transformed into high-stakes gambling dens where fortunes were won and lost in a single night. The games were simple: poker, baccarat, dice, but the money flowing through these rooms was anything but. The mafia ran these operations with military precision. Every gambling house was under the watchful eye of a capo, a mid-level boss who reported directly to the higher-ups. The dealers were trusted men, often relatives of mafia members, and the security was handled by armed enforcers lurking in the shadows. No one played without the mafia's permission, and every bet placed meant a cut for the Cosa Nostra. The house always won, because the house was the mafia. What made these gambling houses especially profitable was the mafia's loan sharking operations. Gamblers who ran out of cash were offered loans on the spot, but at crippling interest rates. The deeper someone fell into debt, the more they became a puppet for the mafia. If someone couldn't pay, they would find themselves forced into criminal activities, smuggling drugs, running errands for the family, or even committing violent acts. Those who still couldn't pay simply disappeared. Despite police crackdowns and public outrage, the Palermo gambling houses remained nearly impossible to shut down. The Cosa Nostra's influence stretched deep into the government and police force. Many officers were on the mafia's payroll, warning them about upcoming raids or turning a blind eye to the illegal operations. When a gambling house was discovered, it would close overnight, only to reopen a few streets away within days. The secret gambling houses became more than just a source of money. They became a symbol of power. They showed that the mafia could operate right under the government's nose without fear of consequences. Even the locals who despised the mafia remained silent, knowing that speaking out could cost them their lives. By the 1980s, with Italy's anti-mafia crackdown in full swing, many of these gambling houses were finally exposed. High-profile mafia trials, known as the Maxi trials, sent hundreds of mobsters to prison, and the grip of the Cosa Nostra began to loosen. But even today, whispers of hidden gambling dens in Palermo still circulate, proof that the mafia's shadow never fully disappeared from the city. The Riviera, Las Vegas, USA. The Riviera Hotel and Casino was one of the longest-running and most notorious mob-controlled casinos in Las Vegas. Built in 1955, it was one of the first high-rise hotels on the Strip, giving it an air of modern luxury that attracted celebrities, tourists, and high rollers. But behind the bright lights and lavish entertainment was a dark secret. The Riviera was a front for organized crime from the very beginning. The casino was a key asset in the mafia's empire, with its profits quietly funneled to the Cleveland crime family and several other Midwest-based mob factions. Though the ownership on paper appeared legitimate, the real power behind the Riviera was hidden behind layers of frontmen and shell companies. The casino's operations were overseen by mafia-appointed executives, men who followed orders without question and ensured that millions of dollars were skimmed off the top before the books were ever balanced. Skimming at the Riviera worked like clockwork. Cash from the casino's daily profits was collected, counted, and then secretly siphoned off before the remaining money was reported to the government. The stolen cash was packed into suitcases and flown out of Las Vegas on private planes, often heading straight to Cleveland or Chicago, where it was split among various mafia families. The operation was so airtight that for years, the authorities had no idea just how much money was being stolen. The Riviera became a haven for mobsters. Figures like Anthony Fat Tony Salerno, Joseph Ayupa, and Carl Tuffy DeLuna were regulars, using the casino as both a playground and a business front. The casino's entertainment acts, featuring stars like Dean Martin and Liberace, helped distract the public from what was really happening behind closed doors. Despite its criminal underbelly, the Riviera became one of the most popular casinos on the Strip, making tens of millions of dollars each year. The mafia's influence ran so deep that even the casino's security guards were handpicked by the mob, ensuring that no one outside the organization could get close to the skim operation. However, by the late 1970s and early 1980s, federal authorities began closing in on the mafia's grip over Las Vegas. The FBI launched Operation Strawman, an extensive investigation into the skimming operations at several casinos, including the Riviera. Wiretaps, surveillance, and inside informants finally exposed the massive skimming network, leading to dozens of arrests and the downfall of many high-ranking mafia figures. In 1984, federal agents seized control of the Riviera, effectively ending the mafia's reign over the property. Though the casino continued to operate under legitimate management for several more decades, it could never shake its mobster legacy. When the Riviera was finally demolished in 2016, it marked not just the end of a building, but the final death rattle of an era when the mafia ruled Las Vegas from behind the scenes. The Riviera's story is a perfect example of how the mafia infiltrated every layer of American society, turning legitimate businesses into criminal empires. It was a place where fortunes were stolen, lives were destroyed, and the American dream was twisted into something far darker. Even in death, the Riviera remains one of the most infamous landmarks in the history of organized crime. The Monte Carlo backrooms, Monaco. Beneath the gilded chandeliers and velvet-lined rooms of Monte Carlo's legendary casinos, a darker world existed, one that never made it onto postcards or travel brochures. The Monte Carlo backrooms were whispered about among Europe's elite, a hidden network of high-stakes gambling dens that operated in secret for nearly a century. They weren't run by the casinos themselves. They were run by the men who owned the casinos. The story starts in the early 1900s, when Monaco was becoming the playground of the world's wealthiest families. The Casino de Monte Carlo was the crown jewel, a palace where fortunes were won or lost under the watchful eye of royalty. But what the tourists and aristocrats saw on the surface was only half the story. The real power in Monte Carlo belonged to the Corsican mafia, a violent, secretive syndicate that controlled everything from heroin trafficking to arms deals across the Mediterranean. The Corsicans realized that the casino's biggest weakness was its obsession with appearances. Monaco's ruling elite wanted the city to be a beacon of luxury, a place where everything looked perfect. That meant they couldn't afford scandal, corruption, or violence leaking into public view. The mafia turned that obsession into their greatest weapon. They created a secret gambling underworld right under the noses of the police, and the police helped them hide it. The backrooms weren't casinos. They were private gambling salons buried beneath luxury hotels, behind locked doors in penthouse suites, or hidden inside mansions overlooking the French Riviera. If you were rich enough, or dangerous enough, you'd be quietly invited to one of these secret games. The rooms were always small, no more than 10 or 15 players at a time. No cameras, no windows, just green felt tables, golden ashtrays, and piles of money that could buy entire villages. The games themselves were brutal. No limits, no second chances. Baccarat was the most common, a game where millions could be lost in a single hand. But the backroom's real addiction was chemin de fer, a faster, bloodier version of Baccarat played exclusively by the ultra-rich. The Corsican bosses loved it because it made men desperate faster than any other game on Earth. If you ran out of money, you were offered credit on the spot, but the interest rates could reach 30% per night. The more you played, the deeper you sank. If you couldn't pay, there were only two options. The first was to become a courier, smuggling heroin for the Corsicans through Monaco's ports in exchange for your life. The second option was a final car ride into the hills of La Turbie, a lonely cliffside road where gamblers' bodies had been turning up since the 1920s. But the scariest part of the Monte Carlo backrooms was how untouchable they were. The Corsicans didn't just own the games. They owned the police, the judges, and half the politicians in Monaco. There were stories of entire police stations shutting down for the night when the bosses wanted to move cash. High-ranking officials were regularly spotted at the tables, betting away taxpayer money next to gangsters with blood on their hands. Even when the French intelligence services knew exactly what was happening, they couldn't do anything. Monaco was, and still is, one of the last true untouchable cities in Europe. It's a tax haven built for the rich, where the law only applies to people who can't afford to break it. The only time the backrooms ever came close to being exposed was in the 1970s, during the French Connection drug bust. But the trail went cold as soon as it reached Monaco's borders. The backrooms weren't just about money, they were about power games. Princes, arms dealers, movie stars, and spies all sat at the same tables, brushing shoulders with some of the most dangerous men in the world. Deals worth billions were made in whispers between hands. Wars were funded, assassinations were ordered. By the late 1980s, the backrooms started to disappear. Not because of police crackdowns, but because the Corsican mafia itself was collapsing. The heroin pipelines dried up, the old bosses died or went to prison, and Monaco slowly buried its criminal underworld beneath layers of polished marble and PR campaigns. But anyone who spent enough time in Monte Carlo knows the truth. The backrooms never really went away, they just got quieter. Even today, Whispers follow the city's wealthiest visitors. Rumors of private salons hidden behind locked doors in the Hôtel de Paris, or games played on yachts floating just outside Monaco's waters. The Corsicans might be gone, but the game always finds new players. In a city built on wealth and silence, some debts are still settled far from the lights of the casino. In rooms where no cameras are allowed, no questions are asked, and the price of losing is whatever life you have left to give.